Alrighty, if we are live, and I believe we are, so I would like to welcome everybody to the fourth live podcast episode here on 100 Years of the NFL, a historical journey on YouTube. My co-host, um, Griff Barlow, is here with me tonight. We'll probably only be on for about 30 or 40 minutes here tonight, dissecting the latest in the sports world here. It certainly has been a while since we've last met each other. Of course, final exams and everything else school-wise has kind of kept us, but it's going to be fun here tonight. And then right at the very end, I got a very special announcement regarding an episode next week. So to kind of just get us started here, I'll give you the floor first here, Griff, to start. If you wanted to talk about your favorite teams or seeing kind of like your thoughts on the last few weeks in the sports world.
Yeah, and I appreciate you having me on again. I know it's been probably about a good 2 weeks since we last met, considering exams and everything. But I think since then we've probably seen some of the best games of the NFL season so far. At least the craziest finishes, that's for sure. With the
Absolutely.
with the way the Patriots game ended, of course, that was something you don't see ever. And then I guess just with the shifting dynamics of how the playoffs are going to shake out and the way that things have been. And hilariously, the NFC South is still wide open,
Yeah.
and any team seems like they could take it at this point, or at least between the Saints, Panthers, and Bucks. But even I think if the Falcons went out, then they have a chance as well. So it's really tough. Like just looking back at these last couple of weeks to really get a good measure on like how things have been going. And I don't know. The NFL's been crazy this year, though. The amount of parity that there is really more than we've ever seen.
It's going to be interesting to see how the final few weeks play out. I was kind of surprised that Atlanta kind of used that bye week to their credit, even though they did lose to the New Orleans Saints. I was happy that they gave that rookie quarterback Desmond Ritter about 2 weeks to kind of just like sink through the game plan before he took on the Saints. And I thought he played pretty decent, but it's going to be interesting to see how he performs over his last few weeks. But kind of as you were saying about the NFC South, the AFC South could be up for grabs too. I mean,
Yeah.
Jacksonville kind of stealing up the ranks right now, and Tennessee just kind of sliding. If Jacksonville kind of handles their business, they could sneak in the back door, winning perhaps the AFC South in that division if Tennessee kind of slides down over the next few weeks.
Yeah, Tennessee, they're a little bit of an odd predicament right now because they have the guys to make it to the playoffs, and I think they know that as well. I know their offensive line's a little injured and kind of has been all year, um, but um, but I mean Henry. I think Henry not being able to touch the ball in the second half of games was just without the impact of the run game in the first half, and then defensively the team giving up so many points that there really is just no opportunity to get the run game going. And I think that's been their biggest thing. Obviously, apart from Ryan Tannehill being out for the season, and I think Malik Willis, he's one of those guys that is carving himself to be a career backup at this point. I think it's pretty obvious that he's not going to be a superstar in this league. Which, if he proves me wrong, I'd love that to happen. But I think at this point in time, um, it's a little tough seeing Malik Willis really turning into that passer that we really want him to be, even though he's such an arm talent. So I think maybe just give it more time. I don't want to discount his career yet, but at the same time, it's tough even looking at this team right now and expecting a rookie um, third round draft pick taking him to the playoffs, even though that defensive line, the secondary is truly elite compared to the rest of the league. So defensively, they're not stopped. But then you look at Jacksonville, and Jacksonville offensively has exploded.
Yes.
Zay Jones is proving himself to be a huge piece, a huge addition for them. Christian Kirk is trying to live up his contract, and I think we're starting to finally see that Trevor Lawrence is going to be their guy for a long time, and that we can end the speculation that he's anywhere even close to the word bust. So I think the AFC South, the way it's just been worked this year is Honestly, I mean, just like I was saying with the whole NFL, it's just been shaken up so much this year where we're really not sure what to expect anymore.
I
But at the
know.
same time, I'm really appreciative of the fact that we're seeing these new guys, these rookies get into the mix and actually show that they can play.
Mhm. Tennessee's kind of been in a weird conundrum for me for this year, especially after they fired their GM John Robinson a few
Mhm.
weeks ago. I was a little surprised about that move there, but kind of as I have said in recent years as well, just this whole division has just kind of been crazy. You could say ever since probably Houston kind of like won the division in 2012, and of course Jacksonville won the division in 2017. Certainly Indianapolis has kind of struggled ever since Peyton Manning has left them. But kind of really, I'm just kind of waiting to see, how the powers may be here in that AFC South division going forward. I mean, I was happy that um, Trevor Lawrence finally got a head coach in Doug Peterson because I was not a fan when Urban Meyer took the Jaguars job, and that whole organization was just a mess last
Yeah.
year under his tenure. And just it's nice to kind of see Jacksonville kind of get their legs under them, and their defense is starting to come up big as well over the last
Yeah,
few
and
weeks
that's been
as
one of the bigger
well.
things too,
Mm-hmm.
especially.
Devin Lloyd and kind of getting some of those younger guys involved in that defense. I'm just kind of interested to see if they can kind of figure out their form and hopefully just kind of be a consistent winning team instead of just doing it once every year. Kind of go back to the Tom Coughlin and Jack Del Rio days when Jacksonville first
Yeah.
came into the NFL in '95 through 2007 when they had those two.
Yeah, and I think you're starting to see a little bit of that culture shift again.
Mm-hmm.
I know in around 2007, 2010, sort of those, sort of that area you're pointing out. I know they had David Garrard from,
Mm-hmm.
I believe is he an ECU quarterback?
I think so. I think
I
you're
believe
right.
so.
Yeah, they had
Yeah,
David Garrard and they had Leftwich from Marshall, I
and
think.
right, Leftwich from Marshall. That's right. Well, I think both in that combined era, I mean, if I'm not wrong, they definitely had a few wild card
They
stints,
did.
and they had some real players. I know Henderson defensively up front
Mhm.
was a big piece, and I think we're starting to see that they're building themselves from the defensive line once again. Like you're mentioning with Devin Lloyd from Utah, um, he's really been a stud for them this year, and I think that they're looking at him to finally break through and become that guy they've been looking for ever since Ngakoue and Campbell have left.
Mhm.
They really haven't had that impact on the pass rush, other than I guess now they have himself and Josh Allen. So and they're really mobile guys that can play in that system that they have designed for them.
Mhm. It's going to be interesting to see how the final few weeks play out. As I mentioned, if Jacksonville can swipe that division out from under Tennessee,
Hmm.
and then just kind of seeing about as far as the other divisions go right now, as far as the AFC goes. I mean, Buffalo and Kansas City tied at 11-3 right now. Of course, Buffalo holds the tiebreaker over Kansas City, so they would be the number one seed. Chiefs are currently number two. Cincinnati has really heated up over the last
Hmm.
few weeks. They got a huge game against the Buffalo Bills coming up in about 2 weeks. That'll be a big topic of discussion when we meet on Tuesday night with my cousins from Buffalo. They're huge Buffalo Bills fans, so that'll be interesting to talk about with them. But how do you kind of gauge Cincinnati's chances this year in the postseason? Because I was just remembering this the other day. If Joe Burrow and Cincinnati, if they pull out that division against Baltimore, if I remember my thoughts correctly, if Burrow wins at least one playoff game this year, so if he wins the wild card round game, whoever they play against, I think he's going to have the most playoff wins of any Cincinnati Bengals quarterback in their history. Because I think Ken Anderson only has two,
Hmm.
Esiason has three, and Burrow could have four. So Burrow could easily go past those two Bengals legends if he wins his
Yeah.
first playoff game this year. It's been amazing to see Cincinnati kind of turn it around after a bit of a slow start.
Yeah, I think the way I see it is, well, in the off season, I mean, everyone expects to have like that really just a Super Bowl hangover. Is what I mean. Everyone wants to call it, but Cincinnati did nothing but get better. Not only on the offensive line, but on the defensive side of the ball as well, where they were a little vulnerable at times last year. And I think that we're just seeing Jamar Chase emerge whenever he plays with himself, Higgins, that entire those entire receiving corps. I think we're really seeing those guys rise up and not only help Burrow, but I think we're starting to see how Burrow is starting to trust his legs a little bit more again ever since his injury, and um, and really just step up and serve that team well. Um, and I also think the addition of I believe it's Trey Hendrickson that they
Yeah.
have on the defensive line, and he's really been a stud this year. I'm not sure if he made the Pro Bowl, but if he didn't, um, then I imagine he was really close because watching every game this year, he is all over the quarterback, and he's always giving issues to the offensive line.
I, re- I really like that free agent pickup when they picked him up from New
Yeah.
Orleans last year, and when he turned that defensive line around on its head, really being one of their true standout leaders. I said they found a steal in free agency because I don't think anybody expected that big of an impact that Hendrickson had last year, and certainly this year has certainly stepped it up for Cincinnati once again.
hmm Yeah, and I think that's what we're really looking at with him is I think they were replacing what they had in Carlos Dunlap in those years that they were making those wild card games and those divisional games with Andy Dalton and the rest of that team. And I think that defensively they had really been lacking ever since then, and had just from the inside out, losing the pass rush with Dunlap, really just with his age more than anything. But but then disassembling the team, losing the linebackers, um, and then all the way out to the safeties. But now you look at him now, and I believe the Bengals have is it Von Bell and
Von
Bates?
Bell.
And yeah, and Bates, and those two are maybe one of the best safety duos in the league. Um, and oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was going to throw out another name on their defense as well, that Akeem Davis Gaither from Appalachian State, when they selected him.
Oh
He's kind
yeah,
of come up over the last few weeks, too. I've been impressed with um, his rising and just kind of getting chance to start on that defense.
yeah. Actually, I noticed him a little bit. I know he was making a couple plays. I wasn't sure if it were him or I believe they. I could be wrong with this, but I believe they drafted the Notre Dame linebacker. Um, and he has a little bit of an interesting name, um, and I believe it's hyphenated. But I know that there was a huge steal in the draft. I believed him to go to Cincinnati, but I could be wrong with that. But
I'm just pulling up their roster right now. Give me
okay,
one
no, yeah, you're good.
second.
I was
Yeah.
just looking at who they have though, and then at linebacker Jermaine Pratt from NC State, he's really rose up and become one of those staple guys in the defense as well. I think.
So I see Gaither. I see this other guy, Cam Taylor Britt.
Oh, so Cam Taylor Britt's a Nebraska product, I
Yeah,
believe.
Nebraska. Yeah.
And yeah, Nebraska. Surprisingly, as bad as they've been the last couple of years, they have actually produced a lot of good defensive backs. Not to branch too far out there, but he's been a really big impact this year for them as well.
I'm kind of happy as well. We're kind of going into college football. We'll probably talk about this in just a sec. I'm glad Matt Rule took that job at Nebraska. I think that's a perfect spot for him to rebuild that program after, just so many disappointing years in a row, trying to bring that program back to its glory days when they were dominating their conference. Yeah, I just can't think of that guy who they would have drafted from.
What I'm looking at here is because obviously they had Hamilton drafted, but it was Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah.
Oh, that's it. Yeah,
and he's actually a Cleveland Brown. So I'm mistaken, but they are in the same division.
I think he was that one who people were a little apprehensive about because I think he had like that heart condition or something at Notre Dame. I think that's kind of like why he slipped in the draft a little bit. Some people were having him as a first round pick, but I think he fell to the third round because he just had some health concerns.
Yeah, and I think he was one of those guys that I could be wrong. I believe. Am I thinking of the right guy? Well, as of now, he is on injury reserve, but regardless of that, that entire division's been not as crazy as some of the others, but it's been really exciting as a fan of the Panthers, but also a fan of Joe Burrow this year, who's been on my fantasy team. So I've been able to watch himself and Jamar Chase, who's also on my team. And other than Jamar, him having that 3 or 4 week stint where he was out with the ankle or the hamstring, I believe, um, he's really been one of the most impactful receivers in football. And I think, ironically, you really might be able to make the case now that Jefferson and himself might be 1 and 2 in terms of where we're seeing receivers at in the league these days. Just in terms of talent, at least that's the way I see it.
Absolutely. I've kind of been impressed as well with Kenny Pickett and Pittsburgh kind of turning some things around. Cleveland, I'm not kind of sold on as of yet. That'll be a topic of discussion probably for next Tuesday. And I'll just throw this one quick thing out about Cleveland. I remember they beat Baltimore, I think, last week when they beat them 13-3, but I was not impressed when Deshaun Watson kind of like as soon as he took that final kneel down, he just kind of like turned around, like screamed to the heavens like he had just won like the division or something. I'm like, Watson, you got more questions than answers in that organization right now. I wouldn't be celebrating anything too early just yet there. But what we're going to do here really quick, unless you wanted to pipe in, but before you did, though, what I was just going to say is since we're about 16 minutes through, we were just going to reverse roles a little bit here. If you wanted to ask me any questions about the NFC or any historical questions, go ahead if you want to reverse roles.
Yeah, well, I guess because usually I kind of tend to lean on the Giants a good bit talking to you because I know, that's your bread and butter when it comes to that and NFC East in general. But I guess looking across the entire landscape of the NFL and especially in the in the AFC, looking at the Bills and their division and the way the Patriots have shaken up this year as well. I guess my question would really be like, how impactful do you think that loss is with the Patriots this weekend in terms of not only their division but their playoff chances as well?
So I was just going to say, just what was the question again? Just about New England's point of view, or just?
Yeah, I guess just New England and their because I really wanted to touch on this just with the way the game ended. I really couldn't believe what I had seen.
Me neither. That was totally.
Genuinely, it's not only is it just completely boneheaded, and Jacoby Myers, I grew up watching every one of his games at NC State.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe what I had seen, like genuinely. But my question really was, like, what do you think this really means for the Patriots? Not only going forward this year in their playoff chances, but as a whole, how do you think this impacts the Patriots in terms of where they are in their division and where they're going to be looking at in terms of draft order now?
To me,
it kind of just seems like their season might be done.
To me, I've just kind of really been a broken record about this, for most of this college football and NFL year, and just kind of really seeing how the Patriots are right now. Last year, when we met in July, my cousins and I and my other co-host, Billy McGee, I remember telling them I had a lot of New England Patriots fans where I used to work at Publix, and, I still work at Publix, and also my other places as well. Some Patriots fans would come up to me and they say, like, we got Tom Brady 2.0, or he's going to be a Tom Brady replacement right away. And I said, I immediately shot down the rumors. I said, to me, Mac Jones reminded me of an early Drew Bledsoe when Bledsoe was just coming up in that organization with Bill Parcells. That's who he reminded me of as a rookie last year. But I think Belichick and his coaching staff this year, they got, as I mentioned about Watson, I think they got more questions than answers. And I feel for Mac Jones because he has certainly, I wouldn't say he's regressed, but just knowing that he hasn't had an offensive coach really to, mentor him and still tutor him, because he's just a sophomore. He's just only in his second year, and just to see him regress and then also being replaced by Bailey Zapp for a few weeks. And then you had Brian Hoyer. Just like, this is one of the messiest quarterbacks, that New England has had in ages. I can't remember the last time they used 3 quarterbacks in a single season, but I got to go even before Drew Bledsoe when that was there, like when Steve Grogan and who was the guy who he had with him in the 80s, Tony Eason. Yeah, Tony Eason and Steve Grogan. That's a name for Patriots fans to remember those two. But that's just kind of what I'm just seeing in New England right now. It's just, they're system I think is broken. I think Belichick needs to hire an offensive coach this offseason, but I just think getting Joe Judge and Matt Patricia back was not going to be the answer to their cures there. And I just kind of think Belichick has kind of lost his touch, as well as Nick Saban has kind of shown a little losing his touch at Alabama. That I've been on the record many times saying that.
Yeah, I know. I completely agree with you. I think the best way to describe it this year is the Patriots are really just in over their head when it comes to coaching and then what they're actually putting on the field. I think there should be no reason to completely blame Mac Jones for any of this. I think it all starts with he doesn't have any weapons offensively whatsoever. Trent Brown, the left tackle, has completely regressed from his prime. And I believe that the offensive line in general has just struggled this year, especially with the amount of injuries they've had. I know their center, David Andrews, Tom Brady's center for an extended period of time, he was out for most of the year. So I just think the Patriots, not only dealing with injuries, but going into this year, I think they knew the personnel they had just wasn't necessarily maybe not a playoff contender, but definitely not a collection of guys that you're expecting to make an immediate impact, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I think a good surprise for them is Ramondre Stevenson. He's really been a guy that stepped up and filled that role of being a three-down back, where he's proved that he can really work the pass game well, and he can also run the ball pretty well too. But aside from that, more shifting divisions, because I think it's pretty obvious that that division's pretty dominated by the Bills at the moment, at least with the way the Dolphins are sort of regressing, it seems like. I think we can also reflect on probably the second craziest game, if not still the craziest game of the week, in the Vikings and Colts game. And
Yeah.
I think that's pretty unbelievable. First, looking at the Colts, I think it's pretty crazy that the way Matt Ryan's career may end up ending here is losing the 33-point game. And I think, unfortunately for him, he has Hall of Fame type numbers, and he's going to be pretty much remembered by the fact that he's an all-time choke artist at this point, which is honestly pretty unfair to say to him, to just put that on himself. But it's more just the fact that he's been on those teams when it just seems to happen every time. But the question I would like to lean to you is, does this say more about the Vikings and their issues on defense, or does it say more about that they can be a playoff team and actually go deep, or does this raise more concern than anything?
I think, to me, it kind of is interesting that you can kind of almost see it as both ways. To me, I kind of saw in Minnesota early on this year, one of my peeves I had on them wasn't so much kind of giving Kirk Cousins that 1-year extension. I mean, he kind of did start out a little slow, but it's just kind of nice to see Justin Jefferson, Thielen, KJ Osborne, and those guys stepping up on that offense around him. It's great to see there, but that defense, I think, has just been so old for so long. I mean, Harrison Smith has got to be, probably one of the best defensive backs I've seen over the last 10 years, but you can see his age is coming up there. Patrick Peterson, again, another really aging veteran on there, and they kind of have a bit of an old linebacker unit and defensive line. I think for their GM, Adolfo Mensa, that has to be a priority going into that next NFL draft in 2023 for his thing. But on Indianapolis, though, I think it's time for the Ursay and Ballard family to just completely overhaul everything. Start from scratch. Keep Jonathan Taylor. Try and keep some of the young guys on the defense as well, and kind of keep some of that young offensive line. Like, keep Quentin Nelson, keep Ryan Kelly, but just you've got to just start over here, because I think when they had Phillip Rivers kind of bail him out a few years ago with how good his season was, and then you had them getting Matt Ryan and everything. I think the last few years they've kind of really started to gauge so much on winning with veteran talent, and I get that Sam Ellinger started a few games for them this year, but I don't see him as a long-term answer. I know he's only had a few NFL games in his career, and a lot of the mock drafts that I've been looking up recently, a lot of them are having them take a quarterback in the first round with their first pick. But I just have to say that, just be smart in whoever you choose. Because I say, Ohio State's never had a great trajectory for their quarterbacks. If CJ Stroud drops all the way there, Levis could be there from Kentucky if you want to bench him for 1 year behind Matt Ryan to learn from him. But I just think, for the Bowards and the Ursays, I just think it's just time to overhaul that whole team. Just try and keep the young guys that you can, but you've got to start the youth movement, and it's got to start now, especially with the way that game ended against them. Because I said this to someone, Indianapolis has never struck me as a team ever since they moved from Baltimore to Indianapolis. I mean, I'm going to get flack for saying that on here, but just ever since they moved to Indianapolis, they've struck me more as being an offensive team than a defensive team. I know they had Tony Dungy, and I know they've had a few defensive-minded head coaches. Jim Caldwell was another one of them, but I just don't think this has been ever a defensive-led team in Indianapolis. I know they've had Dwight Freeney and Robert Mathis.
Yeah, I was going to say that, yeah.
Those guys, but just, it's never struck me as being like a top-tier defensive team, and that needs to be the biggest thing that they have to manage in next year's NFL draft.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think that not only should – I think it's an interesting point, what you're saying with Irsay, just to completely strip the team down and see where you can go, because you don't want to throw away those years of having that healthy offensive line, sort of like how the Cowboys were with Zeke as a rookie. That might be one of the best offensive lines ever, and they really just couldn't do much with it since they really just had some issues with quarterback play, and then more on over. But I think we're looking at some similarities with the Colts, that the quarterback's been an issue since Manning left, kind of like you said. Other than the few years of having that Pro Bowl version of Andrew Luck, he obviously showed not to be a long-term. He wasn't going to be a long-term guy, and then we all knew Rivers wasn't going to be it as well, and same thing with Brissett, and honestly Ryan as well. I think all three of these guys that they've really given the chance, I think, was pretty obvious that it was 1 to maybe 2 years of an investment, and then looking to find that new guy. So I'm not sure really the direction they're looking to go, other than maybe just go to the playoffs this year, go all in, and then look to see if they can build with youth. But I think that's completely backfired on them. I know Shaquille Leonard's been out most of the year, star linebacker, and then they've had some issues with getting to the quarterback and then protecting the quarterback as well, honestly. And Matt Ryan just doesn't have that same pocket presence he once did as a Falcon when he took them to the Super Bowl. And truthfully, I haven't watched those games from start to finish. I don't believe any one of those Colts games, because it's really just hard to watch them establish that run game with Taylor and constantly just starting and stalling and really getting nowhere. But I also will say that Ryan definitely isn't all to blame. There really isn't many weapons on the outside other than Pittman and Campbell, who are good but not great, and not guys that you're going to lean on to make to the playoffs.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how Indianapolis, as I said, just kind of moves going forward. I just kind of think, I think they can get it right eventually, but I just think, like you said, just investing so much, and Rivers and those guys just kind of overlooked a lot of their issues, especially kind of once Carson Wentz and Matt Ryan came in over the last 2 years. It's just kind of been reflecting in Indianapolis' stature here. So we're just about to hit the 30-minute mark here for our broadcast here. If you want to exchange one last question each, and then I will have an announcement at the very end. I'll let you ask me a question, then I'll ask you a question, and we'll wrap this up from here.
Yeah, I know we've kind of been sitting on the NFL this whole time, which, we could talk NFL for hours. But I guess shifting a little bit to the college football playoff, as we're getting pretty close to that, and bowl season in general, been pretty exciting this year. If you've kept, I don't know if you've kept up with some of these low tier bowl games, but they're actually been pretty fun to watch, especially with a lot of the guys opting in and playing in for these smaller schools.
Mhm.
But moreover, I think looking at this playoff, it's pretty interesting to see. Obviously, we're expecting, or um, everyone's expecting Michigan to sort of roll TCU.
Mhm.
I believe, at least anyone besides TCU fans, I believe that Michigan will probably find a way um, to beat TCU out, as they definitely have been overperforming a little bit. But I guess a pretty simple question, maybe a little bit of a cop out. What do you think about just the what do you think about the games coming up for the playoff? And I guess, do you have any ideas of how this is going to shake out other than what's being expected?
I mean, I've kind of been in discussion. I mean, my good friend Billy McGee, he's a diehard Georgia Bulldogs fan. We've been keeping up with them almost all season long. To me, it's just amazing to see how much Kirby Smart has put his imprint on there, and everyone's kind of comparing Georgia as being the new Alabama of the SEC. It's kind of interesting to see how that has gone there. But people, I think, are really underestimating, I think, how good TCU has been this year. I get, pundits and everywhere said, just they had a weak schedule or whatever. I mean, partly it's because, the Big 12 just wasn't dominant this year. I mean, when Oklahoma brought in Venables as their new head coach, I thought Oklahoma's defense would have immediately turned a corner, but they had a year that I was not even close to
Yeah,
expecting when they struggled this year at 6-6, barely scraping by and just, getting at least bowl eligibility. That totally stunned me there. And then you also have a power shift in that conference as well. Of course, with Arch Manning going to Texas next year, I don't know if he'll be an initial starter, but that's going to be a huge storyline in that division. Kansas State is back after years after they lost Bill Snyder. They came out of nowhere this year. I love that Deuce Vaughn that they
oh yeah,
have and that Howard that they have. They were exciting to watch when I watched a couple of Kansas State games this year, and kudos to them for knocking out TCU in the Big 12 championship game, which I wasn't even expecting. I thought TCU would have probably easily ran away with that game, but Max Duggan kind of did all he could in that game before they lost in overtime. But I think as far as it goes, I think Ohio State, kind of showed a little vulnerability in that game against Michigan, kind of just going into the 4-team playoff. I think Georgia's defense could be a little too much for Ohio State there, but Georgia, for me personally, I think this has kind of been a weak year for their offense. I think Stetson Bennett, as good as he was last year, just because of a little down this year in the statistics, but I just think their defense is as elite as it was last year, and I think Michigan and TCU, I think that game could be closer than people kind of get because Michigan doesn't have quorum anymore. I mean, I know they
right.
ran wild against Ohio State when they played in the Big Ten championship game a couple of weeks ago, but it's going to be interesting to see if they would have the same success against TCU, even though Vaughn and those guys ran over them in the championship game. It's going to be interesting to see if they have adjustments when they play against Michigan in about 2 weeks.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that's been one of the things I've been looking at, especially since that Kansas State game. One, TCU really wasn't trying to lose, so I think we saw the best from TCU. We saw the best from both teams, really. I love watching Deuce Vaughn. He's
It
like
reminds me of a lot of Darren Sproles.
I was just about to say, yeah, because they were showing the highlights of Darren Sproles during the game. Another former Wildcat, and it's funny looking at both of them because, I mean, they're smaller stature dudes, but they're absolutely like, they're built like like a train, like the way they run through the hole. So I think that's been a really exciting team to watch. But yeah, like you said, I can't pick his name out, but Michigan's running back really performed well versus Ohio State, and I think the offensive line's really been a big factor. But I do really expect them to continue to dominate that run game. I do expect Michigan to win, and maybe not win by. Uh,
Donovan Edwards was his name.
Excuse me. Yeah, that's exactly who it is. But yeah, I expect Donovan Edwards to really put up some numbers. I don't think he's a quorum, but I also think that he's probably about 80 or 90% of what you're going to get out of that, considering the fact that he is the one right behind quorum, and and the offensive line's still the same as it's been all year. So that's just the game I'm looking at. As Michigan would probably pull that one out pretty
I agree.
maybe not too easily, but I think handedly.
Could be a little close, but then Michigan could probably pull away. I think my interest is kind of seeing, if JJ McCarthy is going to probably struggle a little bit because he only completed like 50% of his passes in that game against Ohio State. So if TCU can kind of neutralize them, it's going to be interesting to
Sure.
see if McCarthy can kind of beat him over the top with some deep passes because Ohio State kind of missed several big tackles in that game. But my last question here before we wrap this up. I know you say like you were big on the ACC this year, and of course North Carolina and Clemson kind of tuned in for a pretty interesting ACC championship game. I know Drake May kind of tried to write off a bit of a disappointing last stretch. Hopefully they can write in their bowl game, but latest news out of Clemson, though, with DJU going into the transfer portal. I was really surprised seeing that move when Dabo Sweeney, of course, pulled him at halftime, and then his backup played the rest of the game. My question to you is this, though, just kind of seeing how crazy the NIL has really done for the transfer portal over the last few weeks, and just kind of really seeing just some insane storylines that kind of going to May. I remember reading like just the other day, I think they said like two programs offered May like $5 million to
Really? Yeah.
transfer from North Carolina to another school. Just my question to you is this: do you just kind of think the NIL has just kind of really spun out of control? Even though I know Mark Emmert is stepping down in a couple of months in March, and Massachusetts' Governor Charlie Baker is going to be named the new commissioner of the NCAA. I mean, just how do you just kind of see this whole NIL thing shaken up over the next few years, because it has just gone off the walls here.
Yeah.
Over the last
Well,
few
I know the
years.
best way they kind of described it so far is it being really just the Wild West um, of just how the NIL is being handled, and kind of like you were just saying, I think it's um, pretty outlandish that the NCAA is moving with someone who has the experience. I believe you said it was Charlie Baker. Um,
Massachusetts governor, yeah.
right, and I think he has no real experience in sports, I believe, and obviously he has some idea on how to manage pretty big groups, but I question that move honestly, from the NCAA's perspective and how they handle the NIL in general. But something I don't try to do much is quote or really take from um, others like opinions too heavy. But I was listening to Colin Coward the other day, and I know he
Yeah.
has freezing cold takes left and right. But I think he actually made a great point the other day, saying the NIL really has only been what the other sports have been doing for years. As like basketball, kids can go pro right out of high school still, straight to the G League overseas. Tennis, golf, every sport like that can go pro. And at this point, I really think baseball as well, obviously.
I agree.
But but at this point, I think it's pretty, maybe even a little petty, I'd say, to get too upset with these kids making money. At least I think having issue with it is something um, that really isn't relevant to how these kids are performing and and what these kids' motives are to get them to certain schools, because you're starting to see that really. No, I think no matter what, that they're going to end up going to programs where they need to be, and the NIL money is going to be there regardless.
Right.
I think you're looking at programs that are willing to pay a lot of money, but like you said with the Drake May situation, he wants to be at UNC, and he's going to get plenty of NIL money and NIL deals while he's there. Um, but I mean, he's going to be a future millionaire in the NFL, so I think that's the least of his concerns. But to fully answer your question, I really don't have that much of an issue with the NIL. I think, if anything, it's finally giving the players the recognition, at least getting really what they deserve, and it keeps it a lot more upfront and clean, as we don't have to deal with these under the table negotiations and all these really sketchy deals when it comes to recruiting college athletes. So I think, and all in all, I am actually a big I'm a big supporter of the NIL and how it's been so far. Even though, like you said, it has been a little wild, especially with the offers given and um, how certain teams are trying to attract players. But I think, if anything, it's made it a lot more exciting for the sport.
I just think to me this will be the last point of order, and then we'll wrap this up right
Sure.
here. We'll just close it out for me and you. But I just think my problem with this is just I just don't like just all these head coaches and athletic directors and programs just kind of butting heads with this. I mean that whole Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban situation before the
Yeah, that
season
was
last year
ridiculous.
when those two just kind of got at it. I mean, to me, I just kind of think of it as just a way, I mean, like you said, I love the idea that college players are finally being paid. I
Mhm.
love that, they're finally starting to get their just due. And what I love more than anything, especially this year with the way the transfer portal has been, we've just seen so many great storylines from Caleb Williams and Jordan Addison at USC going from Oklahoma and Pittsburgh, respectively. You had Michael Penix performing extremely well at Washington. He's going to return for another year for the Huskies
I'm excited
next
for
year,
that,
and
by the
so
way.
many other great storylines as well. I mean, I just love how smart these kids have used the
Yeah,
transfer portal to their advantage, but I just don't like it that the coaches and the athletic directors and everybody else, they're just kind of butting heads about it, and they're just kind of
yeah,
not seeing like the whole bigger picture of what's going on behind closed doors.
right. And it's like seemingly everyone has to have an opinion on it, when in reality, um, it's just the best thing for the players, at least in my
Right.
opinion. And I
Exactly.
think
Right.
whatever's best for the players is going to stick, and and that's not going to change anytime soon.
Well, I think that's going to do it for us here tonight, though, on our 100 years of the NFL, a historical journey for our fourth live podcast episode. Next Tuesday, though, you guys want to join us on next Tuesday night's broadcast. Is Griff Barlow, myself, Billy McGee, and possibly 6 or 7 other special guests will be joining us for a very special Christmas and New Year's Eve podcast edition next Tuesday. And last point of order here before we also head out is, I remember sending you that email, Griff, about those 4 NFL mock draft editions that I gave you
Oh yeah,
for the list. Tomorrow I'll be sending you an email, just kind of like with a little bit of a easier, condensed version to read. If you want to look that over the weekend, we'll probably dissect into that a little bit more
cool.
next Tuesday. But before we go, though, I'll let you have the last word if you want to have the last word before I close this out.
Yeah, no, not much more. I think we covered a lot of cool topics, a lot of pretty interesting topics concerning the NFL, and then I think touching on the NAL, the way that the NIL has been, especially National Signing Day,
Mm-hmm.
just coming across. I think we're starting to see so much movement in players, and I think that we're seeing that among all sports. Starting kind of with the NBA 10, 15, 20 years ago, the way the players are so mobile now, and the way in the MLB that we're starting to see some of these super teams starting to be collected with these players coming in from organizations and then leaving off. And I kind of think we're seeing the same thing with college, kind of how certain players were going to one school, then the other, and now the other. And I think now at least that they can use NIL to their advantage and hopefully stick to one particular place. So I guess we'll see how that kind of shakes out. But I definitely am glad we kind of stuck on those issues.
Absolutely, and it'll be interesting to get our points going on for next Tuesday. But this is Alex Chris and Billy McGee signing off here on, or excuse me, Griff Barlow signing off here on 100 Years of the NFL, our episode 4 podcast. Be sure to tune in for next Tuesday for a lot of great sports insight from everybody joining us. Then have a great Christmas, everybody, and we will see you all next Tuesday. Have a good night, everybody.